Welcome to this special Lent retreat. Wherever you're joining us from, and whether you're with us live or at a different time, I hope and pray that you find this day spiritually refreshing, stimulating, and nourishing. This quiet day at home is part of our Los Olivos Retreats program and will be the last of a series of online retreats we have been offering during the pandemic. So it is a very special one for us in that it marks the end of a season of online retreats and activities, and we hope also the beginning of a new season of residential retreats. So as we begin our day together, I would like to say to you both, welcome and thank you. Welcome to this spacious day of prayer and reflection, and thank you for setting aside today to be part of our dispersed pilgrim community around the world. The title of today's retreat is Christ in the Desert. So just from these four words, you can be sure of two things. One, that the focus of this day will be on Christ. And two, that the invitation for this day will be to journey with him to the desert. Now, by desert, I don't just mean a physical space of barrenness and wilderness, but a spiritual place of inner silence, of inner wrestling, and of soul work. As Rowan Williams once wrote, a desert is an unpopulated place. And if we are to let God give what God wants to give, we must somehow find that unpopulated place in ourselves. In the Bible, the desert has a very prominent role. It is the place of freedom and testing and character formation for the Israelites after they fled from slavery in Egypt. The desert was a time of waiting for a promised future in a fruitful land that would take 40 years to materialize. It was a place of wandering and moving and questioning and doubting. It was a place where God was present with the people, as a pillar of cloud by day and as a pillar of fire by night, and where God guided the community to their promised destiny. Once they settled down in their new homeland, the wilderness was the place where the prophets withdrew to meet with God, away from the noise and distractions of city life. The desert, therefore, holds an enormous place in the collective psyche of the people of the Bible. We began this year after the Christmas celebration with the story of the baptism of Jesus. There, in the River Jordan, as John the Baptist reluctantly immersed him in the waters, a dove descended on Jesus and the voice was heard from heaven. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Well, today we are invited to follow in the footsteps of Christ out of the river into the desert, to watch and listen and learn the deeper meaning of these words at his baptism. Because the story of the temptations, first and foremost, seeks to answer the question of what did it mean for Jesus to embrace his true identity as the beloved Son of God. For 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus will fast and pray in the desert, wrestling with that question and trying to make sense of his mission. The temptations, on one level, reflect how he questions his own identity. If you are the Son of God, do this or do that. By the end of his time in the desert, Jesus has a clearer understanding of who he truly is and what he has come to do. In this retreat, we will reflect on Jesus' experience in the wilderness, following closely the account found at the beginning of Matthew chapter 4. And we will journey with Christ to the desert. We will be invited also to travel to the innermost parts of our being, to confront the distractions, delusions, and temptations in our own lives, and to redefine our relationship with these inner voices in the light of Jesus' words. And we are going to do that in conversation with the Desert Mothers and Fathers, a diverse movement of Christian men and women who gained a reputation for being wise spiritual teachers. This movement began around the beginning of the 4th century, a time of change and transition in the Roman world. As Christianity went from being a persecuted minority religion on the margins of the Roman Empire to a state-sponsored institution that would soon be associated with privilege and power, an increasing number of Christians, uneasy with these changes, decided to leave the cities and move to rural areas. For these men and women, city Christianity has succumbed to the fascination and temptation of worldly power and was in danger of losing its soul. Many of these desert elders believed that the communities that were meant to worship Jesus the Christ, whose kingdom was not of this world and who taught us to pray for that kingdom to come, had now chosen to ally with the kingdoms of this world. They saw this change as unavoidably leading people away from God and as fostering corruption, ambition, and compromise within the church. These desert Christians became a resistance movement which spoke to power from a place of powerlessness and which sought to model a countercultural way of living the gospel. So you may say that as the church consummated its marriage with political power, these men and women chose to follow the path of integrity from the margins of society. They followed the example of Jesus after his baptism and moved into the desert to seek God in more faithful and authentic ways. They built basic dwellings, small cells, and they lived a life of simplicity, dedicated to manual work, silence, and prayer. Their cells were their sanctuaries, both literally and symbolically. They gave them protection and shelter, particularly at night, and they acted as their own personal chapel or prayer space. Whenever one of them struggled with their prayer life or found it hard to center their hearts on God, another monk would say to him, "Go sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything." These men and women also became spiritual guides and teachers, and folk came from nearby cities to ask for advice and to receive their wisdom. In terms of personality, some of them were real eccentrics. Others were perhaps too radical for our 21st century Western taste. But many were just ordinary folk who simply wished to go deeper in their relationship with God, to know Christ better. Gradually, they drew others to themselves, and the first monastic communities were born in Egypt and Syria and other parts of the Middle East. In this period, and for these people, the desert became not a space of personal retreat, but a place of spiritual revolution. In the silence of the desert, they confronted their own demons. They struggled with doubt and inner distractions. And through all that, they discovered their true selves in God. In the wilderness, they experienced revelation, conversion, and transformation. The desert was for them a place of revelation and revolution. 2 years ago, when we ran our first ever online retreat at the beginning of the pandemic, we looked at ways of coping with this new situation for all of us at the time, particularly in the context of the first confinement. I remember that one of the texts that we explored was by a Carmelite nun from Andalusia, here in Spain, who shared with others some helpful lessons from her own experience of being an enclosed nun in an enclosed community. At the top of her list of tips was this: embrace this new situation from a place of freedom. We choose to stay at home freely for the greater good, and not just because we've been forced to do it. In doing so, we will find a deeper freedom, an inner freedom that no one can take away from us. I believe this advice can also be helpful for us today, at the beginning of this season of Lent. Today we are invited to enter the desert deep within us from a place of freedom. Today we are encouraged to follow Christ into the desert and with him to confront our own demons, motivations, and desires, to engage in real soul work so that we can know ourselves and God a little bit better. As I've already said, you don't need to physically travel to a desert to enter this sacred space. The desert mothers and fathers knew that well. They often challenged those who had physically left the cities to live in the wilderness, but had not been able to let go of the city mindset. Whilst they recognized that some folk who came to visit them from the towns in the area had a deep experience of the desert in their lives. We can also find the desert in the midst of the cities and towns and villages that we live in. And I hope and pray that today you will find the desert at home. If you are new to our online retreats, a word about the format for the day. As we always do, we will begin and end our day with prayer to help us still our minds and center our hearts on God. For these 2 prayer times, you may find it helpful to have a Bible, if you would like to follow the scriptures, and a candle, if you would like to light a candle at home with us at the beginning of each of these prayer times. We will be using a simple liturgy that includes poetry, silence, music, a reading from the scriptures, and some prayers, and all the words will appear on the screen. After morning prayer, when you're ready, you may watch the first address, Christ in the Desert, the journey to self-knowledge. Here we will explore the 3 temptations of Jesus in the context of his own life and ministry and of his own search for personal identity. And we will consider how the desert practice of interior watchfulness can help us grow in self-knowledge and in the knowledge of God. And we're going to do all this in conversation with the scriptures, with contemporary art, and with the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers. After the first address, you will have some personal time to reflect on that talk. And you can also look at some of the suggestions and ideas in the PDF Quiet Day Resources 1 more about that later. I would then encourage you to have a break for lunch, and after lunch, when you're ready, to watch the second address, Christ in the Desert, the Way of Jesus. Here we will explore the temptations of Jesus as symbolic of the three greatest temptations most human beings wrestle the most with. We will do so again in conversation with the scriptures, the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers, and with the writings of Henry Nouwen, an inspirational spiritual teacher and modern-day mystic. After the second talk, you will again have personal time and space to reflect on it and to respond to it prayerfully. There are a number of ideas and suggestions in the PDF Quiet Day resources too. Again, more about that later. We will then meet again to pray together in a short service of evening prayer. You will need to scroll down to the bottom of this page to get to that video. And we will end the day with a final wrap-up session using Zoom. Now, this is an optional session, only available if you're following the retreat live with us today on the 5th of March of 2022. If you would like to attend that final session, I would invite you to consider sharing with the group a particular verse from the scriptures or saying from the Desert Fathers and Mothers that has spoken to you today. The Zoom room will be open from 4:25 UK time at 5:25 p.m. in Spain. For this introductory talk, we are using the Los Olivos YouTube channel so that it can be streamed live for you. This means that at the end, you will see some ads for other people's videos. Please do not feel obliged to check out their exciting content, tempting as that might be, and do try and stay with us. The rest of the videos on this page are recorded and contain no ads. This means that although today you are invited to watch them with us at the times suggested in the program, you can also watch them at any other time on demand. In fact, all of the resources of this Quiet Day will remain available for the coming months, so you can revisit them in the future or send a link to a friend. It also means that during this session and each session, you can pause the video if you would like to reflect on a particular message. Today, I would encourage you to join us for morning and evening prayer so that we can start and end the day together, praying at the same set times with one voice and heart. Morning prayer will be at 10 a.m. UK time. That is 11 a.m. in Spain in about 10 or so minutes. And evening prayer will take place at 4 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. in Spain. Finally, to make this day a little more interactive, as you have already seen, we have a live chat area which some of you are already using. We'd love to hear from you through the day, so feel free to leave a short message or share a brief reflection with the group. Ama Syncletica, one of the most revered desert mothers, once said, "There are many who live in the mountains and behave as if they were in town, and they are wasting their time. It is possible to be a solitary in one's mind while living in a crowd, and it is possible for one who is a solitary to live in the crowd of his own thoughts." My prayer for us today is that whether we are alone or surrounded by a crowd, or whether the crowd is around us or within us, we may be able to hear God's voice and to know God's presence as we follow Christ into the desert. Amen.